Welcome to TESO Consulting Group's DEI podcast series, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadow of Resistance. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I am Erika.
Welcome back. I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.
And I'm Erika. And this is our podcast, Why Is It So Hard? Shining Through the Shadows of Resistance. And as many of you know, in this podcast series, we discuss issues that prevent us from being socially just and free as a society. So the goal here is to disrupt the status quo of racial inequality and inequity in systems. And so each episode challenges us, both us and all of you, all of our listeners, to be the change that we want to be. And today we begin a new series. So let's tell them about our series.
Our new series is entitled Things I Wish I Knew About Race. Now, here's the thing. We know a little bit about race, but we confess that we don't know everything.
Yeah.
And we also confess that this series is not going to tell you everything either. But we do hope that it gives you something that you haven't heard before and that it enlightens you in some way and that you walk away feeling a little bit more empowered and a little bit better about how you engage in society.
Absolutely. And it gives you some tools to go back to our original goal, which is to really be the change that we want to see, right? So this is not an indictment on anybody or anything like that. This is us learning together. So how can we learn together, and how can we give each other the grace to make mistakes and then do better, right? As our elders used to say, when you know better, you do better.
That's right.
Right? And so speaking of mistakes, that's really where we're going to start with today.
Yeah,
right?
mistakes that teachers make.
Yeah.
So, why should teachers, or actually not just teachers, but anybody, why should people become aware of the historical and social context of the backgrounds of students and their families, or the backgrounds of those that you engage with at the workplace?
Yeah, I think it's really important. Our society is, we use the term increasingly diverse, but it's always been diverse.
It has been.
Right? It's always been diverse. I mean, it really is sort of from the beginning of, even though that we weren't on sort of equal playing fields, America really started in a space of diversity, right? And so we are now in a place where we're starting to talk about it, and we're starting to explore, like, what does it mean for us to be in a society that is equally diverse, right? So we're in a space where we are exploring how to undo some of these inequities. And so, like, we really need, if we're going to do that, then we really need to be reflective about some of the decisions that we make, some of the actions that we take, because the truth is, because we started out in our country, our historical context, we know the inequities that were there. We know some of them overtly, and some of them we still are unearthing, right? Some of us are still discovering that. And because of that, the language and some of the norms around our actions, which were really unjust, we still do, right? There are some assumptions that we still make. And that's the reason why we really need to unpack some of these mistakes and address some of these mistakes that we make.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about, the people that you see either in the classroom as a teacher or a school administrator, the students that come through your building, or even the people that you work with, what we realize that diversity is a strength, it's a positive thing, but a lot of times, because we don't know a lot about one another, we make assumptions about each other, or judgments about one another, or we rely on what we've heard, which may not be positive or helpful in any way. And so, it's really important that we think about, like, okay, so what are the things that we do that we probably could do better? Either in the classroom or in society, in the workplace. Like, what could we do better? What are those mistakes that are commonly made that could be, could be considered offensive or could be considered inappropriate or not sensitive? Like, what types of mistakes
Yeah.
are we talking about here?
So I want to start with like Culture Day, or you know, multicultural day, or anything where we really have positive intentions, good intentions around exploring other cultures. I want to start there because I think particularly for you and I, if we go into a school district, one of the things that the schools will say is, we have International, Food Day, or we had, our multicultural day, or that kind of thing. And they kind of hold it up as like, this is the progress that we're making. But one of the challenges that we see with that is, one, the biggest challenge is we just kind of stop there. We stop with those visible markers of culture. So we share each other's food, and we're like, oh, okay, that was really great. I really enjoyed that.
Or we might hear some music.
We might hear some music.
Dance, or see a dance, or some traditional
Yes.
dress.
Right. And then it stops there.
Right.
Right. So what's the problem with that?
Well, I mean, what happens, and I agree with you that, you know, yes, it's a good start, if you will. However, it really doesn't help us to understand people's culture.
Yeah.
We might learn a little bit about some of the traditions of culture. I almost feel like this is like the low-hanging fruit. So this is like the easiest thing that we can do to learn about culture. That harder work to learn about culture and race and ethnicity and the experiences of people, that harder work takes more time.
Yeah.
Because the culture day is just like one little tiny glimpse in a moment of time where you learn a tiny little something about, one group of people. But the truth is, we as Black people, we live in our skin every day, all day, and not just a month out of the year or a day out of the year where we get to be celebrated. It's really about like, how do we celebrate, each other and the ethnic and cultural backgrounds of each other on a continuous basis?
Yes.
How do we embed that into what's happening all the time?
Yeah, I really love that idea about embedding it, because when we just relegate somebody's culture to a day, we really do other them. Because what we say is, all this other stuff that we do throughout the year, this is like the real stuff, but we'll give you a day to, showcase your culture.
And we know that's not the intention.
That's not the intention.
Right.
But for teachers, so when we think about, some of the mistakes that are made, it's really sort of not embedding, like not integrating that culture, those cultural traditions into the work of the classroom, right? So, take for instance, like when we think about, we do a lot of work with, culture, and if you think about culture as an iceberg, then, food and language and dress and music, all of those are the visible parts or the visible signs of culture. But then underneath, a much larger piece of that iceberg are all the things you don't see, but which really sort of anchors those visible markers. So when you think about something like in a culture, if somebody makes a mistake, like how are they restored back into society? Like a lot of times that's cultural, our relation, the way we relate to each other. And so what if what if you took that culture day and really started identifying the ways that we relate in our different cultures? Like, what if we knew how in a separate culture we really exercise restoration after making a mistake? Think of how powerful that would be for the kids in your class who are part of that culture to really be able to use that in the classroom, and for you as the teacher to be able to use that in the classroom.
Yeah.
I think those kinds of things are really important. But when we just say we're going to share food and some music and then we sort of move on, it really is a lost opportunity.
Right. And
Yeah.
really learning and understanding culture really does take time. So you and I recently had an opportunity to take a wonderful trip across the world to Italy.
Yeah, that's
and something that we noticed while we were there, whenever we would go to a restaurant, our American culture is built on capitalism.
Yeah.
And so, when you go into a restaurant in America, it's really about like, make sure you go in, you order, you can have a good time and enjoy your company. But ultimately, the wait staff is waiting for you
Yeah.
to move on out so they can bring the next crew in
Yep.
because,
More
it's
tips.
money,
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
money.
Mm-hmm.
And people who are in the restaurant industry, who are, wait staff, they
Mm-hmm.
tend to have like a low wage
Mm-hmm.
and their living is based upon their
Yeah.
tips. And so the more people they can come to sit at the table,
That's
the
right.
more earning potential they
Yeah.
have. Well, over in Italy, in several different areas, we were pretty much in the region of Tuscany,
Mm-hmm.
except for one of
Mm-hmm.
those days where we went to Venice. But while we were there, we noticed that the restaurants' service was very different.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, the wait staff would come and they would initially take, the beginning of our order. First of all, they have several different courses,
Yeah.
and it's on the menu as
Mm-hmm.
multiple courses.
Mm-hmm.
So they expect you to be there for a while. I think one of the days we sat at a restaurant for 4 hours. And
Yes.
it was just
Mm-hmm.
a part of the culture.
Mm-hmm.
And we noticed the tables around us, people weren't getting up and leaving. They
Mm-mm.
too were sitting,
Yeah. Yeah.
and just enjoying themselves. And the wait staff doesn't come around every 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking for somebody,
Yeah. Right.
It was a different experience
Very
there.
different. Very
And
different.
we as Americans, we had to be careful not to be critical
Yeah.
because what we saw was a different society.
Right.
They have a different economic system there.
Mm-hmm.
They operate differently, and mealtime is very different.
Yes.
Even
Yes.
the siestas.
Yes, absolutely. Like one afternoon, we were like, okay, we're going to go shopping. And we got there during the middle of the day and shops were closed, right? They were like, yeah, we'll be back 3 o'clock or 3:30. And so even just that, having to adjust to that, and I really love what you said about not being critical. Like this is another way of life,
Right.
right? This is
Right.
another culture, and it works here. It worked there. And I think as soon as we sort of settled into it, we weren't rushing up from the table, or we weren't, looking for the check right after dessert or whatever. And so we had to adjust. We adapted, But
Absolutely.
having that perspective, really helped us when we thought about sort of really flowing and operating in that culture while we were there.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the same thing happens in here in America, where we have so many cultures that are a part of our school system, a part of the workforce. It's really like, how do we learn to appreciate what's different about
Right.
about the cultures that sit in front of us? There are different ways that different cultures and ethnicities relate to one another, the way they speak to one another, the way that they give eye contact to one another. And I think some of the mistakes that are made is when teachers center their own culture.
Yes.
And not the culture of those who are in their classrooms.
Right. Right. Or even like not teaching. We saw a video recently about two recent high school graduates that said that they graduated from a diverse high school, but they didn't have what they would consider to be racial or cultural literacy. Right. And so the diversity that was in their school was almost sort of a lost opportunity for them because they really didn't learn how to navigate the cultures of the different the cultures that were represented in their school. And so I think for us, what we really want to encourage teachers is really to find ways. Well, first of all, reflect on how the dominant culture, which is really in education, is white middle class, right? So how is it centered in your classroom, in the school? And I think that's the first place, right? And then really sort of seek to, we're not saying don't have culture days. We're just saying extend it, right? Make it a little bit more, make it more meaningful so that, you are able to integrate, some different other cultural norms into the classroom.
Right.
And so that starts though with the reflection, right, of the teacher. So reflecting on your own cultural practices, reflecting on your own messages about these other cultures, I think is a really great place to start.
Right. And also that reflection on your own biases.
Yeah.
So, where do you hold bias? and really being willing to be honest with yourself about your views and how your views might impact what you do in the classroom on a daily basis.
Yeah,
Because
I think
that's really important to think about. I think another mistake that can be made is around the issue of tokenism. So you may have a relatively homogenous group of students sitting in front of you, but there may be one or two who are part of a different cultural group or different racial group. And you may find that if you're talking about something in class, that it's easy to ask that student, you know, or those two students, you know, well, you know, Erika and Tonya, you guys are Black. You know, tell us what it's like, you know, in the Black community about blah, 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 blah. And ultimately, what that does is that puts students on the spot, and it makes them have to become the spokesperson for their racial group or their ethnic group, which is completely unfair to them, because first of all, no group is a monolith. We've said it before.
That's right.
We'll say it again. We are not the same. You know, we might both be from the same background, meaning we're both Black women, talking about the two of us, but that doesn't mean that our experiences, our lived experiences, or our experiences growing up are the same. We may not have the same religion, we might not have the same, you know, upbringing, like things may be vastly different, but when we tokenize groups of students, you know, or individual students, because they are they represent a particular group, what we're doing is we are making them feel very uncomfortable. We're creating an environment that is, again, where there's some othering that's taking place in the classroom, and we don't want that.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. That tokenism is, it can be brutal, you know. Speaking as somebody who has been the only, you know, African American, the only female in spaces, you know, it could be tough. And so, and I think part of the challenge is, you know, if let's say you're reading something or you're discussing something that, you know, brings in, if it's the only issue, or it's the only text, or it's the only idea that you're discussing that includes, you know, whatever group, you know, that particular student might be from, or a couple of students might be from, there's a challenge with your curriculum, right? So that means that it lacks representation. So, you know, that student should be able to see themselves, just like white students are able to see themselves in lots of different contexts, situations, and spaces, environments. They should be able to really explore that. And if it's that student, that token student, should really have the freedom to not have to speak on behalf of a race or a culture, or, you know, a country or whatever it is. And so, because we don't ask that of white students, right? We would never say, like, what's it like to be a white male? Like, we don't ask those kinds of questions. And we would never think to, right? And so, you know, making sure that, you know, there is a rich diversity, and accuracy of representation is critical too.
That's the thing, accuracy. And I love how you mention, you know, using multiple sources, you know, because again, one source may have a very skewed perspective, or may not be representative of some of the members in your classroom, some of the students in your classroom. And so, and we've learned this in just, you know, having done research, that, you know, you really need to expose students to many texts and content that shares various perspectives, because those perspectives, number one, they allow students to learn, but it also allows students to now begin to examine their and analyze the context of what's being presented to them, and allows them to draw their own conclusions.
Absolutely.
And be able to ask questions.
And that, by the way, leads you to rigor, which we've talked about in previous episodes. But that sort of the multidimensional aspect of the text that they interact with, and the way that they're able to analyze and compare and contrast, you know, as former English teacher, is really important when it comes to, you know, really increasing the rigor in terms of ideas and the complexity of ideas that kids come in contact with.
And so along the line of lines of rigor, a mistake that is often made might be centered around the expectations that you might have for certain groups of students. It's not uncommon for teachers to lower their expectations for students who they think maybe coming from a background where they're struggling economically, students who typically are marginalized, Black and Latino students in particular, who come from lower socioeconomic homes and environments. Oftentimes teachers may feel like, well, I don't want to put more stress on those students, and so their expectations become lower. And that does a disservice.
It's the what is the phrase? It's the soft bigotry of low expectations. I mean, that really is. I think that's Les Brown's quote. Although I'm not sure. Somebody attributed to President Bush once, so I'm not really sure. But it really kind of sticks with us because of the truth, right? So it's like, these kids come from here, they can't possibly, achieve this, or they can't possibly, we read something about, like ESL students and, kind of not really getting, rigorous work. And, when they clearly can do it, it's just, we have the language barrier. So because I can't do it in English doesn't mean I can't do it.
That's correct.
Right? And so then how do we make sure that we're not wasting their time with, these like really low expectations, and that is unjust to, have a student in a space where they are here to learn, they may be in 8th grade and we're giving them 4th grade work. I mean, that is unjust. Right. And so how then do we make sure that, you talked about, reflecting on a bias, how then do we make sure that the bias, if we're reflecting on the bias, if I think that students from this background can't do it, what makes me think that? What kinds of messages have I received? What kind of images have I, internalized that makes me think that these kids can't do it? And I think that reflection is really important when we think about, really providing kids with the education experiences that they deserve.
Another common mistake that we've talked about before in previous episodes is color blindness. Okay, so in case this is the first time you've watched any of our or listened to any of our podcast episodes, we've got to talk about this one again, because color blindness is one that, where society some time ago said that it was okay to just see people and not pay attention to who they represent, or the racial group that they represent. And so what we hear, even today, sadly, we still hear this: I don't see color. I just see students. Well, let me tell you that when I walk into a room, I know that I am a woman of color. If you tell me you can't see that I'm a Black woman, you can see that I'm a woman, but you can't see that I'm Black, I don't believe you.
Right.
Now that's I discredit you.
That's right.
I can't trust you because you can't see me, really?
That's right.
I know you can.
Right.
And so, what we do when we say I don't see color, we're essentially saying to a student, I don't see you.
Yeah. We read an article by Jay Wamstead, and he talks about the 27 mistakes that white teachers of Black students make. And one of the things that he says about the color blindness is that when classroom conversations about race or racism can't be avoided, we repeat a variation on the lesson that we learned in childhood, which is I don't see color, I just see students. And it's really this idea of not being able to avoid the conversation about race. And the truth is, like, when we talk about, I don't see color, for some of us, it is an avoidance of an acknowledgement or a conversation around race.
Right.
And, we really have to, kind of reflect on that again, that reflection is key. What makes us so uncomfortable about race?
Right.
What makes us so uncomfortable about even acknowledging and kind of lying to ourselves that we don't see color? Because we do. you know, when I walk into a room, you know that I'm an African American woman. If an Asian American walked into the room, you know that that's an Asian American. Like we know these things. And so it really is an avoidance of a conversation on race. And I think that reflection on why we're trying to avoid that is hugely important.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Because we do our students a vast disservice.
Yeah.
You know, and also assuming and only talking about a few standout people in history.
Yeah.
You know, like, you know, as Black kids, you know, we learned about Martin Luther King, Harriet Tubman, and Rosa Parks. And that's kind of what Black kids learn.
Yeah.
Let me tell you that there's so much to learn about Black history, i.e. American history. And there's so much to learn about figures in history that to just say, oh, there are just these 3 people that you need to know about and that's it. No, there's so many people that we get to learn about.
Yeah.
I was fortunate to have grown up in a home where we were reading books and you know, our parents were exposing us to that. But if students aren't being exposed to that, you know, because the teachers just, you know, want to just keep it at, you know, these 3 people in history. I mean,
yeah, I mean,
it's unacceptable.
And I think it's safe, right? I grew up in a community where, you know, we were sort of the benefactors of it having been integrated maybe 15 years before we moved in, maybe 10 years before we moved in. How powerful would it have been for my teachers to say, you know, we're in a community now that is integrated. Let's look at the patterns. Let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at the history of this community. That would have been so powerful for not only the Black students, but for the white students. That would have been just an amazing experience. But it was a lost opportunity because, you know, we just learned about the big 3 as you explained. And so I think, you know,
and we learned nothing about any other culture.
Nothing
outside of you know, the dominant culture.
That's right. Nothing. And so, you know, my Latino and my Latina classmates, they learned nothing. And so I think what's really kind of crucial is, I think we talked about representation before and accuracy, but as you can see, these issues kind of blend into each other. But it doesn't happen if we're not reflective, if we don't take really a serious look at those things and discuss the undiscussable. Right. And that's making sure that we bring them to light. I mean, that is really a part of our work. And I think, again, what we started with was the grace, right? So we've made these mistakes. We acknowledge that we make them. How do we do better now?
Yeah. I also think that as we're thinking about, you know, how can we do better in the classroom, having conversations centered around race, is after we've examined what makes us uncomfortable, we then need to take that next step and read.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
Become informed about what you were not informed
That's
of.
right.
So it's not uncommon that the average teacher may have only had 1 class on multiculturalism the whole time they were preparing to be teachers. And so it's incumbent upon every teacher, and not just white teachers, every teacher of every ethnic group to learn as much as you can. Just become hungry for knowledge and for information. And don't just read one thing. Read multiple perspectives about different groups of people. And don't be afraid to talk to families. Families are so open to being able to share. They want you to know about who they are.
Absolutely.
You know, so
that's
reach
so
out
true.
to the families in your community. Say, hey, we would love to learn more about your family, about some of the traditions in your race or your ethnic group or your religion. You know, come and share.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Invite them in the classroom. Invite them in the classroom to talk about, like, you know, their experiences, or, you know, a cultural tradition, or even a way, you know, there are different ways to learn math. There are different ways to learn to read, like even to share, like, this is how we did it, or this is how I was taught. That's really important. And imagine how powerful it is for kids to see themselves represented in a tradition, you know, in a practice, imagine how awesome that would be for them. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's really powerful. And the truth is, this topic, even, this is part one where we're talking about the mistake teachers make. There's so many more
Yeah.
mistakes that are made on a regular basis, and there's a lot more that we can say about it, but we don't have as much
We
time
don't have
in
the
this one
time.
episode.
We don't
But
have the
stick with
time.
us with this series,
Yes.
because there's more that we're going to talk about in parts 2,
Yes.
3, and 4, and we're looking forward to being able to share with you. Thank you for joining us today.
I'm Erika Leek.
And I'm Dr. Tonya Breland.